What's your sense of the Rondo thing? It feels like we know where it's going to end. We just don't know when we're going to get to that point. Can Fred Hoiberg manage this thing through the season?
Doug, I think your instincts are right. It seems like it's headed in one direction. I was watching closely the other night and noticed that, you still saw Rajon clapping on the bench and not sitting down there with a sourpuss look on his face. It's probably safe to assume that, pretty heavy discussions between his agent and their agency, he's a Bill Duffy client, and the Bulls about the future. And, this is the point where the player and the agent are, they're stating the obvious to the team. I mean, it is what it is. You guys didn't know that you were going to have a crack at Dwayne Wade when you signed our guy. So what are we going to do here? Because the clock's ticking, and especially a guy like Rondo who's, he's been doing this for a minute, and these careers come and go so quickly. You just don't, as a player, you don't want to spend more time than necessary not actually getting to compete when your body still allows you to. So, I think you're probably right. I just don't know what that looks like when they eventually part ways.
It's really fascinating because, as you point out, Sam Amick joining us does an incredible job covering the league for USA Today. There are people who are like, oh, well, this is a weird thing having two guys that aren't great shooters in the same backcourt. Like, no, it was exactly as you painted it. Like, they got Rondo because it was a discount price, keep him for 2 years, it's fine. And then all of a sudden, the Wade thing kind of fell apart in Miami, and they took advantage, probably overpaid to get him, but you get that type of player, you take a shot, and you have to overpay to get him to leave his current home, and that's why this is more clunky. So is there any chance they move anybody else? Like, there are Celtics fans like, well, hey, why don't you just give us Jimmy Butler? Is there any chance that they move another piece in order to make the Wade and Rondo work?
I don't see it. I mean, I don't think Mirotic Butler's not going anywhere. There was a little tiny moment in time where you thought maybe he'd wind up in Minnesota last summer with his old coach Tom Thibodeau. Nobody else is coming to mind. And Rondo, the thing the Bulls are going to be up against in terms of just discussions with teams is that, unfortunately for them, the better the league has gotten at the analytics side of things and trying to quantify a player's impact on the collective group, as opposed to looking at things that are more singular, like, assist numbers,
right,
without any context.
Or rebounds, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Rondo's impact just doesn't. It's not a pretty picture.
And he's running out of teams. And it's not just the teams, but when it goes bad in Sacramento, it goes bad in Dallas, it goes bad at times in Boston, now in Chicago. What I think people don't know about the NBA is not only all these teams talk, but some of the lower level executives, they spread out to different teams, and all it takes is one guy in the room to go like, I was with him in Dallas when he quit on the team. Like, we don't want that. So, I mean, right? I mean, that makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, you battled with Carlisle and Dallas. We know the backstory, and I always feel like I'm in the minority in regards to last season. His run-in with Bill Kennedy, I thought, arguably, kind of revealed the worst side of his character than any of the other stuff when he laid into Bill and had homophobic slurs and so it's just that the optics are bad when it comes to him. I mean, there is some good stuff there. There's teammates that vouch for him. There's teammates that they still point to the fact that there's only so many champions in the NBA, guys who have actually been to the mountaintop, and he's one of those guys. So it's not that there's no value. It's just the sweet spot between his value and the perfect fit in terms of the team and the context on that particular roster. That spot is a lot smaller than I think the Bulls probably wish it was.
Sam Amick joining us on the Doug Gottlieb Show on CBS Sports Radio. There are you mentioned Thibodeau. And look, it's one thing to be bad, right? It's one thing to be 11-24 with a young team. It's another thing to be one of the worst defensive teams in the league when you bring in a coach who's known for his defensive acumen. Is this a fixable situation, or has this backfired on Minnesota in their thought process of, let's bring in kind of old school, hardworking, defensive-minded coach and put him with these young guys who need to learn how to defend and win championships?
It doesn't look good right now. I mean, I'm kind of a slow burn when it comes to being real reluctant to draw sweeping conclusions when you're still talking about 3 months into the year, not even that. But it's a pretty good sample size, and it's just exactly the opposite of what a lot of people, myself included, thought, the ripple effect of Tom coming to town was going to be. I went out to Minnesota during the preseason, and, it takes a lot for me to go somewhere other than L.A. or Portland, considering I'm based in Northern California. So I drudged out to Minnesota, and it was like, I like Tom. I think he's a smart guy, and I thought that Tom was going to light a fire under the young guys' backsides and get them in a really good direction, and that, if the narrative and the idea before was that he kind of wore thin on the veterans who got tired of hearing him, then it made sense that the young guys would be able to handle that and kind of get the best of Tom Thibodeau, and it was going to work that way. I don't know where it goes from here, but it's, I think the tough thing for Tom, because as good as he is, it's pretty legendary how impatient he can be. He's got to be going insane in his own mind right now, because, whether it's his misgivings about Andrew Wiggins and some of the tension that seems to be there, or just the general idea that his message is not getting through. I don't know where they take this thing.
The Rockets for real?
You know what? I think they are. I'm actually in Houston right now. I think they are. They're sure fun to watch, and kind of under the radar. They're right there with the Warriors and the Raptors as far as historic pace offensively. And obviously that three ball is the bread and butter of what they're doing. But to your question, I think the more important stuff as you try to project whether or not they're for real are things that are tougher to quantify, like relationships and culture and mood and things like that. And they are in a really, really, really good place. Mike D'Antoni has had his own little renaissance with the Rockets. And, I just actually spent some time with one of their executives and kind of heard some backstories on just the degree to which he has been able to connect with players, and not even just the Harden types, because, that matters more than anything. But the Trevor Arizas, the Pat Beverleys, the guys who, they're starting to feel like, they want to run through a wall for Mike, and they like the way he carries himself. The complementary nature of the roster bodes really well in terms of keeping players happy. Ryan Anderson and Eric Gordon are just fine being out on the wing, just knocking down open threes. And then in Eric's case, being a playmaker off the bench and a borderline all-star this season. So, that stuff bodes really well. Their defense has gotten better. They're 15th. They're, middle of the pack, which they were 21st last year in defensive rating. So that's another positive. I'm not going to be putting them in the finals as far as projecting here, but it wouldn't shock me to see them in the conference finals again.
Well, the Anderson deal and the Eric Gordon deal, it's a perfect example of fit. Find a place where guys fit, roles where they fit, and get them to not just accept but grow in those roles. And this has been, especially for Ryan Anderson, all he went through personally, all he went through professionally in NOLA. Right. This has to be incredible for him. Last thing, everyone's projecting Warriors, Cavs. That's reasonable. But we get to this time of year, you got trades and you have kind of buyout season. Who's the biggest piece that you think lands with one of these teams before we get to the stretch run?
I mean, we've been banging this drum for 3 months, but the first guy that still comes to mind is Rudy Gay of the Kings. And the list to me is still pretty short of potential impact players, who are going to be available, who are available. A lot of chatter recently about Paul Millsap in Atlanta. That's another good one. But the wing position, and specifically that three, I just think, you got a fair amount of teams that they need scoring at that spot. And Rudy's he hasn't been playing recently. I think he's got a hip problem. He's been a little bit banged up, but he's had a good year. I mean, statistically, you can look at his season and say, he's still a pretty decent version of Rudy Gay. And it's the tough part, though, about this season, Doug, is that if you're an executive who doesn't work for the Warriors or the Cavs or the Spurs, you're sitting there asking yourself, even a Rudy Gay type, how much am I helping myself? How much am I helping my cause by bringing him to town? And how much am I willing to give up potentially for nothing, with him nearing free agency?